Part 12.
She has as well the emotional resilience not to panic, even under pressure, not to claim that the sky is falling and rush around madly and counterproductively merely for the show of work. It doesn't hurt as well that she is the epitome of feminine grace and attractiveness.
I feel like if Jordan were just a little bit more open to open relationships, he'd be trying to fuck Tulsi Gabbard.
Wonder Woman indeed, borrowing, if we can, from the DC world, the comic books, and not the city.
There's so much like the X-Men, she's practically Wonder Woman.
I could certainly envision her as the first truly deserving female president of the United States. This brings us to one Vivek Ramaswamy. He and I recorded a number of podcasts, which I greatly enjoyed. That started before he was running for office, when we discussed another notable accomplishment, the establishment of his Strive Asset Management Fund, designed to give investors an alternative to the mongers of ESG stakeholder capitalism, who are doing everything they can to sneak a particularly pernicious form of top-down, centrally planned socialism.
Let's take Jordan's word for it. Do you have any idea what he's referring to or what he means or the practical steps and documentation and people doing what he's talking about? Please share it somewhere, because this is just the insane kind of like fear-mongery bullshit framing that invokes buzzwords to people who were hungry for them to begin with.
Into the free market system. So,
because the free market system, as we all know, unabated, is just perfectly moral. It's not that countries that regulate their free market system more aggressively do better. It's that any attempt at regulating the free market here is tantamount to a caricatured version of socialist planning.
They can pretend to be virtuous in a manner hypothetically unlike their greedy by implication peers. Not long after embarking on his daring campaign for president, Vivek began a habit of approximately quarterly appearances on my YouTube channel. The
more I talked with him, the more I liked him. So therefore, everything positive I say about him. It's the same formula.
That effort, despite its unlikelihood, given his unknown status as a political contender, unfolded very successfully, bringing both the candidate and his ideas to a wide public audience and proving his credibility as a young and rising alternative.
His credibility as a young and rising alternative. You need credibility that you're young? You can't help yourself but to try to make these people sound vibrant, make these people sound nice, shiny. It's so, I don't know if he's doing it deliberately or if it's just, that's where his head's at. This young and vibrant, daring person. It's just another rich guy doing rich guy shit, talking slightly more intelligently above his audience.
On the political scene. What can I say about Vivek's personality? He is extroverted, both on the assertive and enthusiastic side, characterized by more positive emotion overall than anyone else we have discussed. He's also very high in openness, both to ideas and, as far as I could tell, on the artistic, cultural side, although perhaps more the former than the latter. He shares those traits with Trump, Musk, and Kennedy, although less so, although she is still far above average in such regard, than Gabbard.
I'd just like to again point out that none of this is based on any tests they've actually taken or that he has administered or that is measured in any way whatsoever than his impression. And I can only think about me and my friend growing up, where we would analyze people and we would speculate about their histories, and we would also draw inferences from how they interacted with the world. And it served me and it helps, like being in social work. You want to be able to read a room kind of thing, but it is not like a diagnosis. It is not a diagnostic criterion tool thing. It is a very, very broad sweeping opinion based place that you are coming from. And when you're occupying a place of authority or you're trying to lean on the idea of I've got the license, that should bind you to the tools that it would take to say these things with this kind of confidence. But of course it doesn't.
He's more polite than Trump, certainly, more measured in his speech, less rough and provocative, although also less witty, although certainly not dull. I would hazard a guess as well that he is less compassionate and people-centered than both Trump and Musk.
As if all of this isn't hazarding guesses.
Ramaswamy tends to stay in the realm of ideas and is clearly motivated on the political side primarily by intellectual curiosity.
Which is a fun privilege of people who, again, do not have to live out the consequences of their ideas. Everything he brings to the table that is a fun circle jerk hour on your podcast and how it plays out for real people in the world, neither of you have to be concerned with.
As well as the desire to see things done better, he appears
better, whatever that fucking means,
low in neuroticism and is highly stress tolerant, as those are the same thing, unlikely to withdraw, like Trump, less depressive than Musk or Kennedy, but also less volatile than Trump, quite stable temperamentally on the emotional side. That's a good feature in a crisis, as noted in the case of Gabbard. I suspect he is high in conscientiousness as well, particularly on the side of industriousness, which is half that trait, the other half being orderliness. Ramaswamy is very successful for a comparatively young man, and he has done that in consequence of his own efforts.
Yes, another great man of history on the rise, helped by nothing, coming from nowhere, bootstraps. It's just over and over and over again.
This is not a fate that befalls people who fail to work dreadfully hard.
It's also not a fate that befalls people who aren't born to the access and privileges of everybody that you were talking about.
Cautions with regard to Vivek? Mostly to do with his youth. Mr. Ramaswamy is accustomed to being the smartest person in the room and, perhaps, the most successful. This gives him a certain brashness. When I watched him in the first round of the Republican primaries, for example, he was the candidate who received the most positive responses from the audience, as well as the most negative. The same was true, arguably, of his compatriots on the stage. I thought he risked, in his provocative but undeniably interesting approach, some unnecessary enmity from those same people. And it is not clear to me that this was a good long-term strategy, given the high possibility of sharing a bed with at least some of them, metaphorically speaking, in the future. I would say that as his campaign progressed, he became more moderate and careful in his criticism of his fellow Republicans, but also more measured overall in his utterances. This is a sign of someone humble enough to learn, despite his confidence.
The conflation of humility with political machinations, I think is interesting because, again, we're all just listening to whatever stream of consciousness things that Jordan can pull out of his somewhat informed ass. But still, the idea that you would say, oh, it's humility, not just basic political consciousness that suggests the strategy you're employing isn't working like you want it to, I find interesting. Like, again, when you divorce it from the context of when he's operating, well then, yeah, he's just a humble guy. Like, it shows how hip and wise to the scene that he really is. He's not doing politics.
And that is a good thing. He is, above all, like Musk, Kennedy, and Gabbard, cognitively gifted. And that is also a good thing.
That is also something that Jordan likes to really, really lean on, is if you're smart, to Jordan, it's like all bets are fucking off. Pretty much anything that you say or do next, provided you can articulate it really well, or you've got a lot of money behind it, or you know how to market it really well, it's like, fuck, we gotta really lean into how smart you are. And as a person who considers himself smart, I can tell you, it's way better to be wise. It's way better to be liked. It's way better to be helpful in practical ways to people who need it. It's way better to couch your intelligence in something that shows that you can be meaningfully and sustainably productive. And to my mind, that does not mean spending 99% of your energy building your brand and collecting money in inflaming rhetoric so that you can surround yourself with people who will tell you how smart you are.
Complex jobs require highly intelligent people to manage them. This is true of any job where the demands constantly shift, and governance at the highest level certainly qualifies.
But you know what? Even if you're not the smartest cookie, you can have a lot of experience, you can have a lot of instincts, you can have a lot of contexts in which you can move that other people might not be able to move as well. It's one of the reasons I feel like Biden has been more effective at certain legislative things, because he's just been there in a way that a lot of people haven't. How does Pelosi get her way? Because she's just been there since the dawn of fucking time. Like, yeah, intelligence, clearly, you need it. It's great generally, but something to be said about the institution as it stands and who's been a part of it for a really long time, because that sets a certain tone and culture and capacity for the future that might not exist otherwise.